Hi everyone and welcome to Asami Rat Care. So today's video is something a little bit different. It's basically because last year a few of my friends did something they called the £10 cage challenge, and I've been meaning to do it for a while but not really got around to it, and I thought I would do it for a bit of an interest for now, and I would actually encourage everybody else to give it a go too. The principle behind it is it shouldn't cost a lot of money to kit out a cage. I mean, you can spend loads of money on rats and it's perfectly fine too, and it's quite fun too if you've got the money, but actually it doesn't mean you can't have an enriching cage with very little to spend. So what the principles of the challenge are is you take a small cage, so I've got my Coco, and they used a furret because I have a furret's slightly smaller, so I think I'm kind of one up if I manage to do it. And then what you've got to do is basically take £10, go to a shop and try and kit out an entire cage for it. And we're going to also think about some of the kind of natural behaviours that rats exhibit to try and make sure we meet them as much as possible with a really low budget. So some of the kind of basic rules from this. I'm going to assume that you've got the cage and the substrate already, so that's not included in the £10. Neither are water bottles, they're fairly essential. I'm also going to assume some basic tools, and when I say basic tools I'm not expecting you to kind of have massive complicated stuff. So for me, basic tools are a drill, a junior hacksaw, good pair of scissors. I've also got a slightly smaller pair of scissors as well, my very trusty garden wire, and then I've got assorted kind of clips and such. So these are just kind of IKEA shower rings, just because those are the kind of things that most people will probably have in, and if you don't, they're very cheap to kind of buy initially. I may also have a requirement for duct tape somewhere in this, but we'll see how I go. I haven't really worked out exactly what I'm doing, but I have bought the stuff and got it. Right, so what have I bought for my £10? Massive budget here. So I'm going to start off with my real bargain. So I will say I got all of this from B&M Bargains, which is a bit kind of like a home bargain store if you're not from around the UK. There's generally good value for this. So first bargain was I've got 2 fleece throws for £4. It was £4.99, but I'm going to take the £4, which is what I actually paid for. So I got a really good offer on that. So 2 fleece throws. I'm sure I can do lots of things with these. We shall see what I can do. I'm obviously going to do this without the use of a sewing machine, so I'm going to try and show you how you can do things simply yourself at home, again without lots of fancy equipment. Next we have these. Now these are woven placemats. They cost me all of £1. I thought they'd make quite interesting hammocks. It'd be quite good in cold weather, so warm weather, because they'd be quite cool to sit on. We shall see how it goes. I'm not entirely sure. I just thought I'd get them because they only cost £1. Next thing, also cost £1, was this giant plant pot. Now I'm pretty sure this is going to form some sort of bed. We shall see what that turns into, and it's quite a kind of like good chunky item. Not bad value for £1 really, is it? And my final, oh no, not quite my final item, my final item's even more exciting. Item is another kind of round bowl shaped thing. Now I think this would make quite a nice hanging bed, and we'll be able to see what's going on in there as well, which would be quite good. Again, this cost £1, so nice and cheap. Final item, I was determined to find some way of getting in branches because what are my cage setups without branches? However, trying to buy branches in a supermarket or similar kind of place is nearly impossible, so I went for the next best thing. We've got a broom. Now I've mostly got this for the handle, I'll be honest. I'm not really sure, I'll probably do something with this just because it's an interesting texture for them. I expect they just chew it all off and make a mess of it. But mostly I've got it for the kind of climbing potential of the handle. Right, so those are my items. I've got 5 items for £10, which isn't bad at all. Let's see what we can do with it for my cage. Right, so we've got the workbench set up. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to basically cut this in half because it's going to be too big for my cage on its own. So let's detach it from its bristly bit, which I'll figure out what I can do with when I come to putting the stuff in the cage later on. Currently I'm not really going to do much with that. I can't think of anything to do with it beyond putting it something interesting for them to kind of brush against and stand on in the cage. So that's going to go as it is to one side. Right, so then we've got this. Now I'm going to try and do some means of supporting this so I can hacksaw it in place. and I'm going to go roughly in the middle. It's not particularly fancy this, just trying to make it into 2 short lengths. This is where I find out that this post is actually metal, so quite hard to saw through, but a junior hacksaw will generally get through most things. You just have to kind of be relatively careful, and it might be that I need to stick a bit of duct tape over the end just to kind of protect any sharp edges for the rats. So it's now going to get very, very noisy. What I'll do actually, I'll pause it, saw through it, come back, just to save you the kind of boredom of watching me saw for quite a while. So we are now sawed through. Now, it is a little bit sharp on those edges, so I'm going to give it a good coat covering with some duct tape. But it's a nice kind of solid tube that I can use in various places in the cage. We've got a couple different sizes, that's absolutely fine. I'll take off the label. Actually, the hooked end at this end will be quite useful for hanging it up. So let's get the duct tape on there just to give it a bit of protection. I should say I seem to have accidentally got everything in quite nicely colour coordinated shades of grey, aside from the kind of plant pot, which I think I will assure you is purely accidental, but I think it's quite funny. So it's going to be a reasonably colour coordinated cage for one of mine. Right, brilliant. So we now have 2 branches. Now what I can do as well, which I'll probably do when I'm setting it up, is thinking about how I can kind of like join them on at different angles and so on, just to kind of give them kind of a bit more challenge on there. What you could also do, my rats are reasonably good at climbing, so I'm not going to do it, but you could wrap this in a little bit of string. Again, that's something that I would class as kind of like just having on hand in general, just to give them a bit more grip, but there is kind of a plastic coating on this. I should say it's also aluminium, so it's not going to rust even though it's metal, so it's not a bad thing. Brilliant. 2 branches sorted. Right, so next thing, let's have a look at these and see if I knew what I was doing when I was getting them. When I said these, it's actually one of them. That's fine. I don't really need more than one of these in the cage. So in order to make these into effectively a hammock, I'm just going to basically cut a few little holes in them, which will help me get a hammock hanger through. It's probably not going to last the world's longest, but then it cost £1, so it's not the end of the day, end of the world, sorry. And it's also the kind of thing that will kind of, if you give it a good soak, it'll wash relatively well. At some point it'll start getting frayed as they chew it, but that's fine, then you just chuck it and you can get another one if you want to in the future. I will say you could do this with any kind of kind of fabric style mat. There we have it, 4 holes, ready-made hammock for later on. So the next thing that I've got is this tub. So let's take the labels off. Now it's some sort of measuring mixing bowl. So my ideas with this was I was going to hang it from the ceiling. So to do that, I want to add some holes into it. Now I'm going to do this with a drill because I have one. If you don't have a drill, then actually you can do the same with a pair of scissors like this. In fact, I'll basically show you how to. I'm just using a piece of wood here so I don't poke through and stab my thingamajig. The wood doesn't really matter on that. But basically, if you kind of like keep on twisting like that, you will eventually get through with a pair of kind of small sharp scissors. Through there. The advantage of the drill is it gives you a better hole and it's slightly more suited to the job. You don't destroy a pair of scissors, but these have been destroyed for many, many years. So I've effectively got through there. So all I'd then do is kind of like make it a little bit bigger. Just be careful if you're doing this, you can stab yourself. So for the other holes, I'll probably find out now that the drill is not ideal because it doesn't quite fit, but let's give it a go. In an ideal world, you would have something to hold your job. You wouldn't be kind of like wedging it under elbows on a work surface. I do have a vise in another room, but that doesn't really make for kind of like great videos. Okay, I'm just going to cheat and use the scissors. A drill would do a proper job, but like I say, having something that you can actually kind of clamp it in makes it a lot easier. and I don't currently. I'm not in this room anyway. Right. I'll go through and open that up later. I'm trying to do 4 holes here so I can support it in most places. Now, you could do 3. I wouldn't go less than 3 unless you were trying to make it a kind of like wobbly platform to make it a little more challenging for them. 4 works very well. Sorry, push this back on. Right. Just go through and enlarge those holes. This does mean, in theory, you don't need a drill to do this, but I do think having the right tools is very useful as well. I'll open that one. There's a hole there. What I should say is don't like stab in too hard because you will potentially crack it if you're working with plastics like this. That's where the drill is technically better. It's just a bit tight and awkward for me to use today. Right, so we've got 4 very simple little holes either side, and that makes it a great hanging bed. So, plant pot. Now what I decided to do with this, let's take the plastic sticker up again, is I've decided it's going to make a really nice bed. But as you can see, it's kind of like slightly mobile. So what I'm going to do is basically cut off a flat bit here. We'll see how well this works. I don't expect this to be the world's thickest plastic, given that it only cost £1, which is actually good for my purposes. If it was too thick, we'd probably find that it kind of like cracks when I do it. Right, so that's basically giving it there. What I could also do with this is I could add extra holes. I could add a kind of side hole. In fact, I might do that, just to kind of show the principle. So, like you were doing before with the other one, we're going to make the hole with something sharp and pointed, or a drill. Now, the kind of real secret when you're dealing with this kind of stuff is to give yourself kind of lines to work with. So I'm going to make another one. And I will say, this is quite kind of flexible plastic. It's not stiff at all. This is curved, so it's a bit stiffer, which is great because it doesn't crack easily. You may find that some other plastic is quite tough and you can't do this with. So I'm basically just aiming to make a little window that the rats can come in and out of. Making it with these holes and then just basically joining the dots. You probably find it easier potentially using a Stanley knife in this situation, but it's all up in the garage behind me, so, and apparently that means I'm too lazy to do it. But these are quite tough scissors, so we're doing a good job of it at the moment. The advantage of doing the holes at one end is also that you've basically got a like nice rounded hole at the end, which means there's less of a trap hazard, because sometimes corners that you cut yourself can be quite sharp and they can trap toes and such in there. So let's continue. Nearly there. This is quite good exercise, by the way, which I probably need, to be fair, after Christmas. Right, and the last cut. It's also the most awkward just because of where the ledge is on this and where I've chosen to make the hole. There we go. Now all I'm going to look at is for any particular sharp edges and take them off with the kind of smaller scissors, which I totally shouldn't be using for this. What you could also do, and it would work well for the metal bit as well, is to use a file. A simple nail file will probably do for the amount we're doing here, or if you've got like a wood file or similar, that's even better. So we're just taking off any sharp points. I could go over it with some kind of duct tape again, but in this case I'm just going to kind of do it the slightly better way of sorting it out first hand. Right, but yeah, it's definitely one, whenever you're making something, just go over it with your fingers. If it's going to kind of potentially cause you injury, then it may cause a rat's injury, so that's where we kind of like have to get in there. I suppose the other thing you could use for this is you could use your hacksaw to take off the edges as well, particularly ones on the inside. they're kind of more burrs than anything else, which if you're an engineer you'll know what I mean, and if not you'll probably think I'm mad. There. Right, so we have a nice little house with a peekaboo slot. What I actually forgot to do previously on this, which I will show you now, is if this is a hanging bed, what you will find if you don't do this next step is it becomes a steady kind of like smelly place, because the rats will end up weeing in there in the marinade. So I'm going to add a few drain holes at the bottom. This is quite useful just in terms of like letting any urine drain out. So I'm not going to add loads of them, they don't have to be big. Particularly as what I'll normally do, oops, that's an example of when you go a bit too far. I'll cover that with a bit of duct tape to make sure the rats don't get stuck in it. This is when you push too hard on something that's quite fragile, and you can do that, so take your time and you're less likely to cause cracks like that. I'm clearly rushing for the video, but I also tend to rush anyway because I'm kind of impatient. So you don't need lots of holes here, you just need a few. And actually the advantage of my crack is that will let quite a lot of drainage. So I'm just going to stick a bit of this on either side of the crack. And I'm going to put some on the inside as well. That's mostly to stop anything getting bigger with the rats' weights on it. Though to be frank, there's actually no chance of that going anywhere with the rats in it, because it's quite a solid thing and it's within this ring. If it was a bigger crack I might have to reappraise and I'll have lost one of my items. Right, redone that hole. So perfect. So we've now got two different kinds of kind of bucket style beds. We've got a branchy thing, we've got a hammock, and we've still got two fleece throws to go with. So what I'm going to do with these is I'm going to make some ropes and then maybe a kind of no-sew hammock in theory. Not that I've tried to make one of those before, but I know the principle, so we'll see how it goes. So ropes are quite straightforward. There are different styles that you can do. So I'm going to start off by doing a simple plaited version. So what we're after is some strips of fabric. Now I'm aiming to do this about 1 inch-ish thick. I don't want to make my ropes too thick. I could make it thicker quite easily just by using thicker strips of fleece. It doesn't have to be kind of perfect. It can be rough and ready. My stuff normally is. You're probably used to this by now. Particularly when I'm kind of like doing a quick job for video purposes. Right, so we have one strip. Let's get our other strip. I will say, as much as this was quite a good bargain, getting the 2 hammocks for £4, if you go somewhere like IKEA, you will get something similar. They're not like really good quality fleeces, but for the purposes that we're using them for, that doesn't really matter. We're not asking them to last a long time, and they're going to get chewed and peed on anyway. They should last a few washes, and that's the main thing. Right, so there's 2 strips. I'm going to make the third out of the other colour. Just for variety really, as much as anything. Never let it be said that I don't at least try to make things look pretty occasionally. This is probably a lot easier done at a table though, rather than my bench in the rat room. I would use the work surface, but it's currently free range area set up, and I'm kind of loath to take it all the way down and then back up again. By the way, I have no intention of using all these fleeces on this cage because it would be hard work and probably more than I need to. Right, so to make the first kind of simple style of rope, all we need to do is get our strips and tie a knot in the end. I'm going to take that label off for no particular reason. To be fair, the rats would probably enjoy taking it off. Right, so I've got a knot in the end. I'm just going to use a clip. This will help me kind of like secure it and fasten it to something. Let's see how this works. Basically let's move this down a bit so you can see what I'm doing. Right, so by just fastening it, it gives me something to pull against to do a decent rope. So all this is going to be is a plait. Now the tighter you do the plait, the kind of more substantial the rope will be. So I'm trying to do a kind of like decent plait here. Hopefully you can see that reasonably well. If not, I'm sure there are plenty of tutorials on how to do plaits. Of course, I've left the bits of fleece quite long here. That is because it will shrink as you're actually doing the plait. It is a bit faffy though, because it means you've got these big long tails to kind of like deal with. But you can see now why I've chosen kind of to have the two colours in there. It just looks quite pretty and gives a bit of kind of contrast. But it's not needed for the function of the rope. And you actually also see that even though like I cut really badly and quite messily, it's actually looking fairly neat for me, which is good. But this style of rope is very quick and simple to produce, like I did in not this year's but the previous year's 12 Days of Christmas. You can do it out of newspaper, you can do it out of anything. Fleece will wash though, so it'll last a little bit longer, so this is good for quite a few goes. One of the advantages of me kind of cutting it so shoddily as well is we're actually kind of changing the width as I go, so it adds a little bit of kind of interest. Less nice if you want something that's a perfect finished product. You should make sure it's the same length all the way along, but actually I think it's quite fun. Right, so I'm getting quite far along there, so I'm just going to hook it on somewhere else. Advantage of this style of rope, you can hook it anywhere in theory. Right there, and then just continue. It's getting a bit faster now. Now I'm getting to the ends, I've got less kind of tassels to deal with. Now what you can do instead of this kind of thing is you can also buy some of the ready-made dog ropes. They're often quite cheap and they quite often come with a ball attached to them or similar, but it doesn't take much actually to change that around. Just take the ball off and untangle them and you can get quite a lot of rope for very little effort. Right, now we've come to the end, all we have to do is like before, just knot it. There, so we've got a nice decent length rope. Quite quick and easy to make. So there is actually another style of rope you can do. I haven't made one of these for a while, so let's give it a go, which might be quite interesting. So for this you want a slightly longer length, if anything. Let's cut it a little bit chunkier. And show you a kind of different method. I think this is just getting wider and wider. There we go. And I'm going to do it two colours again. Not sure how well this will work. Again, it's been a while since I've made a rope like this, but I know in theory it should work. And failing that, we'll just have I'll do another kind of strip and we'll do a chunky knit one again. Sorry, chunky plaited one again. My scissors are all getting furred up. They're quite good scissors, but they do get misused quite badly at times. Right, so there we have the two. So we're going to start off in a similar way, tying these two together. I need a little bit more room because I've made it a lot chunkier this time. And I will say, you basically dictate the kind of thickness of the rope that you're going to produce on any of these methods. So again, we'll hook it on to something fixed. Now this is where the kind of differences come in. So what we're aiming to do is twist these ropes, or these particular bits of fleece, quite a lot. to the point where they're starting to kind of like deform a little bit. The tighter you twist it, the better this rope will work. Yeah, this will probably take a bit of trial and error because I can't remember whether you twist them both the same way round or a different way round. I think it's the same way round. Right. Interestingly enough, this is how they kind of used to make rope in the past. Right, so we've got a nice twisted one there. So now what you need to do while you do the other one is, well, in my case, kneel on it, but basically you're looking to try and kind of trap it so it doesn't unravel while you're twisting the next one. And same principle again, we're just kind of twisting this same direction as we twisted the other one. If this then fails, then I'll find out and it's actually the other way around, but I think it's this. It does take a little bit of time, and your arms do get tired, particularly when you're kind of rushing it so that people watching the video don't get bored here, but it's quite a good little technique for making ropes. And like I say before, the kind of tighter you manage to twist it, the more effective your tighter kind of the end rope will be. Right, so that's as much as I'm prepared to do currently. So then what we have to do is, you can't really see this, let's try and back out a bit. Basically, we're pulling both ropes out together and then we're just going to let them twist, and I'm doing this in a controlled manner because I don't want it to get completely carried away and ping. And actually, by the act of them twisting together, they're untwisting themselves, so it kind of holds it in place. And then you get what's basically quite a nice twisted rope like that, and it holds itself. Just to finish it off, all we have to do is knot it at the end like we did last time. And that will actually hold itself really well, and you can see you can still get fingers and such through it. So we have another type of rope, nice long again. I'll probably trim this little bit of extra off from there. But perfect. So this is a slightly chunkier rope than our last one, but they kind of like both work quite well in the rat cage. Right, so we have two ropes. So next I'm going to try and do some sort of hammock. Now I will say, let's move you up a bit. I will say this will be the first time I've tried a no-sew hammock, which will be fun for you particularly. But it's nothing kind of rocket science from what I've seen, so we'll see how it goes. Right, so this is quite thin fleece and quite stretchy, so what I'm actually going to do is kind of like make my pieces double thickness, and we'll see if that works. So I'm folding a bit over, that's about the right thickness. You can see just how shoddily my kind of edges were there. Now I want to make it slightly bigger than previously, than they actually want the hammock to be produced, so I'm going to say about that length. And cut down here. And you don't have to be super neat with that edge. I mean, I know I'm particularly like crappy, but effectively I've got kind of a ledge here. Now I'm going to be adventurous just because I might as well, and I'm going to make it a double hammock. So I'm going to be using some of our other grey fabric. Now what I'm going to do with this, because I want to make it kind of like almost a tube style, is I'm going to make this slightly bigger. So slightly wider, to see whether we can do something so it kind of like loops down a bit. Let's make it the full thickness. We shall see what size hammock this comes out at. So kind of shake it out to make sure both sides are level. And the key thing is it's roughly the same length as the last one. So that is there. Don't worry, this will be over soon. I'm sure you're kind of slightly bored now. Once I do this, this is the last thing I'm going to make, and then we'll set up the cage and we'll see what it looks like. Right, so get that out of the way. Right, so here we have our two pieces that are going to make this hammock. I really don't need my wood anymore. No, my saw, not my drill. No, do, however, still need my scissors. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to cut basically little kind of bits all the way along. So I'm going to go into about 1 inch. Make sure that you're leaving kind of like the knot together. So we're making these like little frills effectively. And we're going to go all the way around on this. Right, I'm going to do this to both sheets. So I'm going to stick it on time lapse so you don't have to watch me very carefully, or not that carefully, cut things, so it'll be a bit faster. Right, so we have our 2 bits done now. So what we're going to do is effectively tie these in a knot. And we don't have to do everyone, but we do want to do a majority of them. And we're basically just kind of lining them up. So we're going to tie all the way along that side and that side. And actually, what we could do is tie some of these to stop the rats getting between layers, but I might just leave them because I quite like the idea of frills. So I'm going to stick this on time lapse again so you're not too bored by watching me do that, but we'll show the principle. So there we have a very easy no-sew hammock. Now it is fairly rough along those edges, but I actually quite like it. I've done a knot in every other tassel. What I could do if I didn't want it to give that tassel look was I could turn it inside out and it looks slightly neater, but not that much. I quite like the tassels. I think it's going to be quite fun for the rats detaching them, and hopefully it'll save the hammock a little bit longer. Right, so those are my items. We have a hammock, a flat hammock. We've got 2 different types of rope, a hanging bed, some fake branches, a brush handle, and a little bed. So I'm going to set those up in the cage and then show you how we're getting on. Right, so there we have it, a cage set up for 10 quid that's reasonably colour coordinated. What I would do if I had a little bit more time, and if you wanted to do, I would continue making some more ropes. I think it could do with a few more of them, and that would be quite happy. As you saw, I decided to make an impromptu little kind of corner scoop hammock, which involved all of 4 knots and a kind of rectangle-ish of fabric, and I could potentially make more of those if I wanted. I could also chop up some slices of the fleece to put in there, tear up some newspaper to add as nesting material, or actually just add some hay if I've got some hay, which I probably will do, to be fair, for mine. Oh, no, I haven't put anywhere my magical brush, which I think I'm going to make a kind of a perch along here. But yes, so this kind of like is really just aimed at challenging the way you think about things. So a lot of us, when we start out with rats, we're very much of the opinion that we must buy rat toys for them. And actually, you know what? Rats don't need rat toys. Rats need things that kind of satisfy their natural behaviours. And that doesn't need to cost a lot of money. You can get things just as kind of exciting, just as fun for them, without spending a lot of money. And that's actually one of the things that I'm kind of really quite passionate about. Don't get me wrong, I would always invest in a Tic Tac for my rats because they absolutely love it, and that is quite expensive, but then I have the money to do that, and actually if you're giving them plenty of out time and you're giving them plenty of fun things, you can do quite a fun cage setup as it is. So what I'm going to do is grab a couple of the girls and see what they make of this. Of course this isn't a normal cage, but I thought it'd be quite fun for them to have an explore of some stuff that's entirely different to normal for them. Right, so I've done 1 or 2 additional changes to the cage since I last did my video. You know, I mentioned that I thought it would look better with a couple of extra ropes, so I've added those in. They're exactly the same principle as before, except this is a twisty rope with 3 strands rather than 2. Apparently you can do that, it just takes a bit more time. And I've done another plaiting rope, so it's just giving it a bit more of a network, and it kind of covers the area a lot better. What I also did was, to my little plant pot house, I've made a skirt. This was not complicated, it was just a square of kind of the fleece, and then I chopped some kind of bits into it and tied it round, so that makes it a kind of nice bit more of an enclosed space. I do fully expect the rats to chew those off, but that's absolutely fine. That's kind of like part of the game for them. So that's my kind of finished cage setup for £10. I think that's fairly good and very weirdly colour coordinated. I can't quite get over that. I don't think I've ever done a colour coordinated setup before that's not naturalistic, so it's an interesting one for me. It was very much fluke, at least initially, and then when I finally got to the end and was looking at the kind of brushes in the shop and saw one was grey, I thought everything else is grey, I might as well give it a go. But yes, so that's where we are with that, and that's my attempt at the cage setup for under £10 challenge. I hope you have a go too. I think it'd be really interesting. Me and a couple of friends are talking about setting up a Facebook group where other people can share their setups, because it'd be really interesting, and I think it's also really useful for other people. So keep your eyes peeled for that. I'll put the link in the comment once we've kind of got something set up, if we do. If not, I still encourage people to kind of like post things and just share the links so we can all see just what you've been up to as well, because I think it's going to really help some people out and give you ideas on how to use things in a way that you wouldn't normally. So over and out from me.